affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm your host, Lex Frieden, and today we have a special edition of Focus on Abilities from Washington, D.C. through the courtesy of the Houston Municipal Channel and ILRU, the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at TIRR. We're going to bring you a special edition of Focus, and we have a very special guest that I'll introduce right after this question. It's a trivia question that we always ask at the beginning of the program, and today the question is, who was the Assistant Secretary of Education who was denied a job in the New York City school systems because she had a disability? You'll get the answer very quickly. I want to introduce to you my friend and colleague, the Honorable Judy Heumann, the Assistant Secretary of Education. Judy.
Nice to be with you, Lex.
Thanks for being here on Focus today.
It's great.
Now, it is true that you actually applied for a job as a school teacher in New York City. Can you tell us about that?
When I went to college in 1965, I was interested in being a teacher, but my friends had all said to me, don't tell anybody you want to be a teacher because you won't get the funding to study and it'll never happen. So I majored in speech pathology, but I took courses in education. When I graduated in 1969, I applied to be a teacher in New York City. I had to take a written exam, an oral exam, and a medical exam. They were all offered in inaccessible buildings. I had to be carried up the stairs by my friends. I passed the written exam, I passed the oral exam, and I was failed on the medical exam. And in writing, the specific reason was paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis. So then I sued the Board of Education, and I actually got my job and taught for 3 years in New York City.
Now, you would say that's a pretty seminal experience in your life, right?
Absolutely.
And that particular experience, do you find that a motivating factor even today?
Absolutely, because it does continue, now that I'm working in the Department of Education, to make me have a strong interest in what's going on in institutions of higher education, for example, as far as recruitment of disabled people into schools of education to be teachers. And as I'm going around, I visited hundreds of schools since I've been in this job, and there are very few people who have visible disabilities who are in positions. I did not teach in special education. I was a regular ed teacher, which of course was something very different. I was the first person in a wheelchair in New York State to get a job, or New York City rather, to get a job as a teacher. And so I am driven by this as a historic problem that unfortunately still goes on today.
Now, your specific role in the Department of Education is that of Assistant Secretary over the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services. What all does that involve?
I have 3 program areas under me. The Office of Special Education Programs, the director is Tom Hare, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, the commissioner is Fred Schroeder, and the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitative Research, the director is Kate Seelman. Those 3 individuals report to me, and it's our responsibility to make sure that these programs are running effectively. And they basically have responsibility for implementation of the special ed law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which every state gets funding for, and every state has an obligation to assure that disabled children are receiving a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which is another program in every state, which has the responsibility to work with disabled individuals who are interested in obtaining employment, helping them get the kind of training and education they need, and helping them become prepared to actually go out and pursue employment opportunities. And then the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, which, as its title says, is significantly involved in doing research and in looking at ways of disseminating quality research that cuts across all issues in the area of disability and all age ranges.
Now, you were appointed to this job by President Clinton.
Right.
And many people who are watching this program might be curious about what kind of qualifications one would have to be appointed by the President to a job like this. Can you just briefly describe that?
Well, this is a political position. So there are a number of things that are involved typically when people get positions like it's a presidential appointment with Senate approval is what it's called. So one, I am a Democrat, and I worked in the Democratic Party on campaigns, and for many years. My professional experience is in the area of education. I've got background in the area of research. I have experience working in the nonprofit sector, at the state government sector, and experience in employment. I had very broad experience, which I think made me meet the qualifications of what the job required me to do. We have about 360 staff in OSERS and a budget right now of about $8 billion.
Now, if some young person with a disability is watching this program and aspires to be a Secretary of Education, what kind of preparation would you advise them to do?
Well, I think it's very important to stay in school. You don't get this type of a job with a high school degree. And typically a bachelor's degree isn't sufficient either. I have a master's degree in public health. Other people have PhDs or are lawyers. So I think you have to really study hard, work hard, and recognize that you need a lot of diversified experience. If you look at people who are secretaries, the cabinet level person, or the sub-cabinet level people like myself, they're different types of people who've been very active in unions, in labor-related issues, people who've been very active in civil rights issues, people who've been involved in education, people who are presidents of universities. And I think for disabled individuals, where we are right now in this particular period of time, is we've gained more experience than we certainly had 10, 20 years ago. But I think for younger people, it's really important to both dream high, work hard, and to make sure that you're not limiting yourself.
Now,
and that you're also not disconnecting yourself from the disability community.
Well, that's a point I'd like you to help me make. Many people with disabilities today, young people, sort of take for granted, I think, some of the benefits of our society that many of us were involved in helping to promote. As your experience indicates, it wasn't too long ago that people were denied jobs on the basis strictly of the fact they used a wheelchair or they had some other type of disability. Today we're past much of that.
Today you don't write it down on paper.
But the issue is really involvement by people with disabilities in advocacy, and I'm concerned sometimes that people are not as involved as they ought to be. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I think we've come from a period of time, now if we're particularly focusing, for example, on disabled younger people, where in the past disabled people were together more often because we weren't integrated in schools, so we knew each other. Like when I went to school, I didn't go to regular school because of my disability. I wasn't allowed into a regular school. So I had a lot of disabled friends as I was growing up. I wasn't able to go to integrated camps, so I had a lot of disabled friends there. Now I think what we have to do, and my office and other programs within the government and other nonprofit organizations around the United States that are influenced or run by disabled people, are recognizing that we have to do a better job of outreaching to disabled individuals who may now be in much more integrated settings and not really know a lot of other disabled individuals, either their age or older. And that it's a harder job for us right now because we need to not only reach out to people, but we need to be offering younger disabled people something that in their very busy lives they're interested in. And my experience is that many younger disabled people or newly disabled individuals, not necessarily just younger disabled people, are really, if they're not friends with other disabled people, kind of stuck. They don't exactly understand some of the problems that they're facing, or they don't necessarily have the wherewithal independently to fight some of the problems that they're facing.
Now, if somebody with a disability is watching this program and they want to be involved in advocacy, where would you suggest they go first?
Well, I'd suggest that they look at the independent living centers in their communities or other disability rights organizations, deaf groups, blind groups, self-advocacy organizations, parent programs. If you're an adult with a disability and you have kids and one of your kids has a disability, you might want to go look to one of the parent programs. Or you just might want to get involved with an organization in the community that's in your area of interest and encourage them to focus part of their work on disability issues. So if you're interested in women's issues and you want to join a women's organization, but they're not doing anything that's looking at the problems affecting disabled women in the community, that's something that you could be volunteering to do. Reach out to other women in the community and find out what their issues are.
And also, as you mentioned before, political parties.
Absolutely, political parties. I'm a strong one in political party involvement.
How do people get involved?
Well, I think, it's, you go to the phone book if you really don't know where your political parties are, and you look up the Democratic Party, and of course that's where I'd like you to look, but you look at any party that you want, and the Independent Party, the Green Party, the Republican Party, whatever it may be, and find out if they have an office and where it is, and then call and say,
volunteer, and
I'd like to come in and learn more about what you're doing.
And find out when their precinct meetings are, the local meetings in your neighborhood.
Right.
Judy, one of the areas that you've worked in, I guess, throughout your career is independent living by people with disabilities. And you've been a leader in that area. You've founded centers for independent living. You've run centers for independent living. And you continue to promote centers for independent living. Are there things on the horizon? Is there a future for centers for independent living in your perspective?
I think that the disability rights movement in this country and around the world is getting stronger and is at a point where we're recognizing that we have to continue to redefine who we are and where we want to be going. So who we were 10 years ago, we can't be 10 years from now. I definitely think that there's a very strong future for independent living centers, because there will always be a population of disabled individuals who need the ability to work with other disabled people, the need to make policy reforms in communities, to make sure that budgets are being focused on the needs of disabled people in the communities, that in some cases services are being provided through the centers. But I think the longer pieces of legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act are in place, and the more successful they become, and the Independent Living Center should certainly be an integral part of the success of those pieces of legislation, the more I think the centers need to continue to broaden their views. So I think they need to be getting more involved in employment-related issues. I think they need to get more involved in entrepreneurial development themselves. And I think the centers need to look at working in a more collaborative, cohesive way. Many of the programs are very small organizations of 5 to 10 staff, and I do worry about the longevity of small programs.
Now, you mentioned entrepreneurial activities. As you know, most of the funding for Centers for Independent Living comes from the federal government through Title VII. And you're actually responsible for funding those programs, but in order for the programs to grow, I think we all agree they have to grow using private funds and money that the centers earn through work that they are doing in their own community. Mm-hmm. Are there specific ideas that you have about things that centers can do in that regard?
Well, I think many centers have been doing lots of different types of work, and that's what's interesting, is to really learn more about the organizations. So you see everything from organizations that have been very successful in doing private fundraising from foundations and corporations to organizations that have set up fee-for-service contracts with state agencies or local governments to provide services, to organizations that are doing things like wheelchair repair and wheelchair sales, to a very interesting program that I saw in Tennessee, actually, that was working with an organization on getting small loans to disabled individuals who are interested in setting up their own businesses. There's a lot of diversity and creativity going on. I also hope that in the future, what we call the parent training programs, which are similar to the independent living centers to the degree that their focus is to work with parents of disabled children, that the parent training programs and the independent living centers begin to work more collaboratively together. And I think we're also seeing that happening in states like Arizona, where I know one of the centers in the parent training program are actually looking at these two groups plus some others buying property together and opening up an office. And I think those types of program developments where the kids would also be able to get mentors from the adults who are working in the centers, but it would really allow people to look more broadly at what the needs are and to look at ways of being creative in fundraising and program development and business development. And I really think it'll be very exciting to see where we are in the next 5 to 10 years. But it is going to be very critical for us to meld strong advocacy skills with individuals who have strong business skills. And I think we're not exactly there yet, but I think I'm hearing more people talking about the fact that they know they need to be there.
Now, you mentioned independent living centers partnering with other not-for-profit organizations and parent groups and the like. What do you think the future is, or how do you see the future of partnering between independent living centers and state vocational rehabilitation agencies, and for that matter, other established organizations in the rehabilitation milieu, rehabilitation hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and so on?
Well, I think rehabilitation centers are totally appropriate ally with an independent living center. When you think about many independent living centers that reside in communities where there are rehab facilities, do in fact have, at the very minimum, volunteer arrangements where independent living staff go in there and work with newly disabled individuals, to organizations where they actually have a contractual arrangement and where people are being paid for the services that they're providing in the centers. I certainly think that it's important for the centers to have a strong working relationship with the State Rehabilitation Agency, but I don't think that they should be a part of the state agency. I think the ability to remain as a nonprofit organization is very important. I think the center should have closer relationships with city governments and county governments and need to carve out niches where, in fact, they can be providing something that is needed that others aren't providing. I mean, I've always been, I'm not running a program anymore, but one area that I've been very interested in is looking at having a center actually work with a company, a business that has nothing to do with disability, and being able, for example, to help the employer keep people on the job longer. And again, non-disabled individuals. So for example, if an employee has a mother that's 70, 80 years old and there are issues going on, that the company could be working with the Independent Living Center through a contractual arrangement to help provide support services for the grandmother and to help provide services for the families. There are organizations that are doing this now, lots of them that are going in there and actually providing those types of linkages. I'm not aware of any of the independent living centers that are actually doing it. I think that there are services that the centers could do for which individuals would pay and corporations would pay that would not take the centers off the path of advocacy, but would rather allow them to learn more about some of the real problems that exist in the community through their actually trying to help people come out of institutions or stay out of institutions and live in the community.
Now, I want to ask you a question about research. Sometimes consumers, people with disabilities, and many people who work and circulate around independent living centers as clients and otherwise have some real questions about the value of rehabilitation research. And I know rehabilitation research is one of the programs that fall under your direction.
Right.
Speaking to independent living consumers, what do you personally feel is the value of research for independent living?
Well, research in my mind is very critical to the survival of everyone. And the wheelchair that I ride in, my motorized wheelchair, has been designed through quality research. The various forms of technology that I use to enable me to be more independent, the lift on the van that I have, the hand controls that my husband uses. If we didn't have quality research going on, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning and get around. I think legitimate questions need to be asked regarding what type of research is being designed and how is that research being disseminated. How are we taking research and getting it into practice? How are we taking some really good ideas that are being designed where we're spending a reasonable amount of money on it and making things out of it that people can benefit from? I also think that one of the legitimate areas of concern is, are the people doing the research knowledgeable enough about the needs of the various constituencies to be doing relevant work? And so I think those are some of the issues we need to look at. Not is research valuable, but what makes research valuable. I think that what I see very clearly in this job is that there still are not enough disabled individuals who are going to the various universities around the United States and getting the kinds of degrees that they need to be able to work in the field of research. And there's various forms of research that needs to be done. And I think we need to be doing more work with both younger disabled individuals to get them to understand what is research, what is the value of research, what is policy, what's the value of policy. Being able to get, my master's is in administration and planning, which really gave me skills that I wouldn't have had I not gone to the university. And it allowed me, in going to the university, to take my areas of interest and apply it through that academic program. That's what I'm trying to focus on in part, and I think that's what colleges and universities need to be doing a better job on, and that's what I think disability advocates need to be focusing on.
Now, you mentioned the fact that independent living advocates and others might have legitimate questions about the type of research that's being done. Speaking as a consumer, what kind of research should researchers actually be concentrating on that will benefit independent living?
There, I think it's important for researchers to be in contact with real people, to be able to understand the needs of people like Lex Frieden and Judy Heumann, or if their area of interest may be in learning disabilities or in deafness or blindness, or working with older individuals who've had strokes or people who have communication disabilities. Whatever their particular area of interest is, they need to have a better understanding of the constituency that they're doing their work for, so that as they begin to think about the types of work that need to be done, that they can relate it back to people and real problems. It's not that all research is applied research. I mean, some of the research that needs to be done is, you know, quite scientific and will lead to things later on down the road. But in applied research, I think it's very important that the researchers know the population they're working with, and that they have a pretty reasonable spread of people that they've talked to, that they also understand issues regarding economics. I mean, certainly you can get great research which produces great products where no one has the money to purchase the product, where you could design something that would be almost as effective that could be much cheaper. What we've been doing here in OSERS to try to help that somewhat is to make sure, for example, that we have disabled people in all our peer review panels, and that we also have people of color on all of our peer review panels.
And the peer review panels are those groups that are
actually review
selecting
applications, right? So if we put something out in a book called the Federal Register, and we say, okay, this is the project, this is how much money, apply by this date, here's the application. Then those applications come in and we have panels, 3 to 5 people that read these applications. And then they rate them and they make recommendations, and I or Kate or Tom or Fred sign off on them. And that's one of the areas where I'm also trying to get more honesty in the system. You just don't have researchers reviewing applications from researchers, but you have real live disabled individuals who have research knowledge, who can be involved in reviewing those grant applications also, so that you can ferret out those that people think are more appropriate for the time that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's a great goal. And again,
well, we've done that on that one thing. Every panel has at least one disabled person and at least one person of color on it.
And it's an opportunity for people. People who want to participate in this should call your office and get referred to the appropriate office, right?
Yeah, and let me tell you also on this, what we've been doing in the Department of Ed is there are many other offices in the organization outside of OSERS. And so we've been sharing our peer review panel lists with offices like the Office of Higher Education. So, for example, they have a project that they're running, a $5 million project, which is focusing on universities, where universities are applying for money to train their faculty and to make changes on the campus. There'll be disabled individuals on all those peer review panels.
That's fantastic.
And so we've been trying to do that throughout the organization, so that, Because one of the things we're trying to say is, if you're a parent group, if you're a disability group, don't just apply for money in OSERS, apply for money throughout the Department of Ed. Apply for money at Commerce, apply for money at Labor. Getting back to the independent living question earlier, and the parent training programs, or the deaf organizations, or whatever they are focused on, look beyond the traditional disability funding sources, because most of these funding sources are supposed to be looking at the issues affecting people in the communities, of which we are a part. So to be able to get, we're doing other things in the department where we're saying on the grant applications, not just in OSERS, remember Section 504 in the Americans with Disabilities Act as you're writing your grant application.
Now, Judy, people with disabilities, again, who may be watching this program, family members or others, who want to be involved in research, can find out about what the research centers are by calling your office and being referred to the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research.
I would suggest that instead of calling, if you've got a computer and if you have a modem, you come to www.ed.gov. And when you get in, that's the website for the department. Then you come to OSERS. And under OSERS, you have the 3 programs that I told you about earlier, and we have a really great website.
And you can learn all about what the research programs are and the processes.
You can learn a description of the program, who's running the program, and who the contact person is.
Very good. As we conclude this episode of Focus on Abilities, is there anything you'd like to say finally to people with disabilities and to others about what really is our goal and our role?
I think we've come a long way. I think we have an awfully long way to go. And I think this is not anything that's going to be done just by disabled individuals. I think it takes real collaboration and cooperation at the local level, the church, the synagogue, the mosque, the private business, the city, the county, the state. Very much needs to be, I think, more discussion about what the barriers are that people with visible and invisible disabilities face. Most people don't realize that most people with disabilities have invisible disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, lupus, cognitive disabilities, cancer, back problems, and many people hide their disabilities because they're afraid of talking about what their issues are. I think the way we'll make our changes in the community, get more people into work, more people into higher education, is by being able to have honest discussions and by allowing people to recognize really that disability is a natural part of life. And by those of us with disabilities and by our friends and our family being very strong advocates and, in my mind, not allowing discrimination to go unresolved.
Very good. You're a great role model, a great friend. Thanks a lot.